Hello friends, welcome. Friends, just 5 days back, their articles got published in the newspaper regarding a US Supreme Court judgment which reversed an earlier US court judgment of giving relief to the government of India in a dispute of over $1.2 billion of a failed 2005 Devas-Antrix deal. The allegation by Devas in the US Supreme Court was that Indian government unfairly terminated a deal between Devas and Antrix. Antrix was the arm of ISRO, you can say the marketing arm of ISRO, to provide satellite-based broadband services in India. So, Indian government actually cancelled this deal after a lot of hue and cry that the spectrum was awarded to Devas as throwaway prizes, which was valued at multi-billion dollars. That was the whole allegation, and therefore the deal was cancelled. Because Devas was aggrieved after the deal was cancelled, so they filed arbitration, and there was a series of cases which went on, and Indian government kept on losing this case. And finally, when it went to the US Supreme Court gave a relief to the Indian government, saying that the jurisdiction does not apply in this particular case, and therefore relief can be granted. But the US court has now reversed their decision. I'm not going to get into the details of the judgment because I don't understand the judgment, right? Because it's very, very complicated. It's basically the issue of jurisdiction. And you can go and read this judgment. I am going to show you how this judgment looks. So this is the judgment which was delivered on 5th of June. And I tried to read and I could not understand many of the things which is being spoken about. But, on a high level, this judgment basically says that, look, there is a jurisdiction of US court against this dispute, over this dispute, and therefore Devas is rightfully claiming this $1.2 billion of claims against the Indian government for execution, and therefore their claim is valid, and therefore the Indian government is supposed to pay. But not now, but we are going to talk about that, what will be the implication of this case on Indian government, whether Indian government has to pay or there will be series of litigation. And on these litigation, which the Indian government will get involved with, what is the strength of Indian government case? That's what we are going to discuss in this video, friends. Now, friends, just to give you an overview as to what this dispute was all about and what is this issue about Devas-Antrix deal, what is the purpose of the deal and what they were trying to do, I have to give you a history. And then we are going to talk about the sequence of events which happened. First, I am going to talk about the history. Now, friends, Devas was a US company which was claiming to have created a technology which will integrate satellite-based broadband with terrestrial broadband. Because it's not a very easy thing to understand. Many people will not understand it. So I will simplify it. Typically, the broadband services can be delivered by two vehicles. One is terrestrial, which we already see, FWA and mobile broadband. And we have Starlink, which is providing broadband connectivity to fixed terminals, which are located in the rooftop, right? But Devas in 2005 was claiming that it is going to provide broadband connectivity on mobile phones. You can imagine that mobile phones in 2005, 2006, 2007, those mobile phones. And the signal is going to get integrated. Integrated means, let me explain. I'm going to show you a picture. Then only you will understand what you are talking about. This is called an hybrid network architecture. Now, this is a broadcast tower. Now, consider this as a satellite for the time being. So, this satellite is transmitting, and there are terrestrial towers located in the various regions where it's a kind of a hybrid network architecture. The satellite is also transmitting and these terrestrial towers are also transmitting. Now there are mobile phones which are receiving signals from both the terrestrial tower as well as from the satellite, right? So this will be looking something like this. You see, this is a satellite. Assume that this is a satellite and this is a terrestrial tower. So the satellite can be hundreds of kilometers. I've only shown 100 kilometers here. It can be 250, 300, and maybe geostationary satellite, whatever, 36,000 kilometers. So it can be at a great height. And these towers, which are located on ground, could be at a distance of 5 kilometers and 10 kilometers. So when a signal is emanating from the satellite and traveling to the mobile phone, and the signal which is emanating from the terrestrial base station, when it travels to the mobile phone, both will get integrated at this point. And then this is going to get delivered over this mobile phone. This is the concept which was being spoken about at that particular point of time. So it's a hybrid network architecture. Terrestrial as well as satellite both were integrated together to the mobile phone. It was not simply a satellite based multimedia delivery. So this was the nuance which we need to understand. This wasn't not just a satellite based, it also included terrestrial network, right? So what was this frequency band? This frequency band was 2.5 gigahertz band, which is called the S-band. And which was the frequency block? This is the block. This is the 80 megahertz block, which is lying backend. So if you look at this block is currently being used by Vodafone Idea, and there are areas which are vacant. This pink which is vacant, and then this is the full block which is being allocated to BSNL, and then there is a gap of 80 megahertz here. This 80 megahertz was supposed to be utilized, a portion of it, a maximum portion of it was supposed to be utilized by Devas by using the satellite transponder. So you will have satellite hanging in the sky, and this satellite is going to transmit to the ground within this block of spectrum, and that hybrid network architecture that I showed you is going to be used to provide mobile broadband connectivity to the mobile phones, right? Now, friends, the satellite transponders, right, if it was sold or given the leased in isolation, that was a different type of network architecture. And that's why if you look at satellite transponders are always leased. Now, providing ground-based, BTSS is a terrestrial based network which is licensed under the unified license. The TSPs are providing terrestrial network. Now, if ISRO was owning this block of spectrum, this full block of spectrum, and they had a live satellite, operating in this block of spectrum, and that spectrum was getting used for providing terrestrial connectivity, which is having a size of 80 megahertz, and then the same block of spectrum in the 23 gigahertz band, which was similar in nature, was sold in the 2010 auction at 12,800 crores. So this is the 23 gigahertz band. 20 megahertz of spectrum was sold at 12,800 crores. And the 2500 megahertz spectrum block was given to Devas as in garb of the satellite transponders, which are being leased to Devas, and with a permission to use terrestrial transmitter in the same block of spectrum which belong to ISRO. So even if the technology does not work, the satellite technology does not work, this hybrid network technology architecture, can be, you can create an illusion, and you can basically say that, look, I don't want this satellite you can switch off the satellite, and you can just simply trigger the ground-based base station to create a terrestrial network at a block of 80 megahertz of spectrum, where just 20 megahertz of it was 12,800 crores. So that was the scam. So you are, grabbing the land, which is valued at 12,800 crores if it was used by ground-based terrestrial transmitter. And because ISRO is having access to that particular spectrum band, because they have satellite which is launched in S-band, in the 25 gigahertz band. So you are leasing the transmitter, and then in the garb of leasing the transmitter, grabbing the land, which is the real estate, which is worth billions of dollars. So that was the scam, right? Now you understand what is going on. Now, there is another problem here, friends. This architecture, so let's go to the state architecture again. This architecture, the hybrid network architecture, which is satellite transmitting along with the terrestrial transmitting and integrated at the base station, did not exist at that particular point of time. Even today, it does not exist. Why it does not exist, friend? Because when you are transmitting from satellite, and you have to transmit to a mobile phone, which is hundreds of kilometers away, even if you are using a LEO satellite, you will be creating interference at this particular point of time, because the terrestrial transmission transmitter is going to transmit only 5 kilometers and the satellite may be transmitting 5,000 kilometers. So there will be a phase collision here at this point of time, this location, and the mobile will not be able to receive signal with high fidelity. So this architecture is not used, friends. Even today, ITU is discussing an architecture as to how to integrate satellite and terrestrial connectivity together in an integrated fashion to deliver these kind of services which Devas was talking about in 2005. So this technology did not exist. So Devas was trying to access this real estate of 80 megahertz in the garb of leasing transponders from ISRO. Do you understand now what the scam was? The scam was not about leasing transponder. That was the easy thing to do. You have integrated along with the transponders a terrestrial network in a real estate which was 80 megahertz versus 20 megahertz which was in 2.3 gigahertz band which was sold at 12,800 crores. Okay, so that was the scam, and that is the reason why this whole deal was cancelled. Now, friends, we will go into my slide deck to understand what were the sequence of events and what are the implication of this US order. So, Devas-Antrix arbitration case, what the US Supreme Court decision really means for us. So, the background of the dispute, 2005, Antrix signed an agreement with Devas to lease S-band spectrum. Right? By the way, just to give you a little bit of more technical nuance, if you really want to communicate to a mobile phone, you can't use high frequency band. You cannot use Starlink 18 gigahertz or 10 gigahertz or those spectrum bands. You actually have to use spectrum bands, which is 2.5, 2.3, 1.8. L band is the best spectrum. And that's why, when S-band transmitters were used, it would have worked in a mobile in a standalone manner if you had removed the terrestrial part of the network completely. If you had not included the terrestrial part, then this would not have been a scam, friends. Because it was possible to communicate to the mobile. It may not have worked that well, but it could have been done. The problem was the integration of the terrestrial part, because the terrestrial and the mobile and the satellite integration, even today, the technology does not exist today. And I'm going to show you the, a proof for that. I'll just take you through one of the FCC document. This is the Federal Communication document which allowed Starlink to connect to T-Mobile's network. Right? T-Mobile is having access to their spectrum in the 1900 megahertz band. But if you look at this line is pretty important. So they have leased, the Starlink has leased, the SpaceX has leased T-Mobile spectrum. But you read this line which says that though it's a lease arrangement with T-Mobile, SpaceX generation to Starlink satellites can enable consumer outside the T-range mobile network to be connected while using their existing device. So what does it mean, friends? It means that the SpaceX T-Mobile integration, when the terrestrial part of the T-Mobile network works in the 1900 megahertz band, and where in the same band when which the Starlink is operating, the 1900 megahertz spectrum, Starlink and T-Mobile terrestrial network in this form, this hybrid network architecture cannot work even today without causing interference. So, if you assume this is a Starlink SpaceX satellite, then this satellite has to work in the same spectrum at which the terrestrial network is transmitting, where there is no terrestrial coverage. You got it? That is the meaning of this paragraph of Federal Communication Commission, which says that outside the range of T-Mobile's network. And that's what I wanted to point out, that this technology did not exist then. It does not exist even today. And ITU is working to create an integration. And this is going to come much later, maybe in 2030. Okay. So let's go to that presentation. So Devas proposed to deliver satellite-based multimedia services. In 2006-2009, Devas raised 5,579 crores, right, and an FDI-based deal. 2011, Indian government cancelled the contract because of the reason terrestrial usage of the spectrum of 80 megahertz which actually the 20 megahertz would have costed 12,800 crores, right? International arbitration and global enforcement. Devas investor initiated an arbitration trial under the bilateral investment treaties. In 2015, arbitration award was awarded of 162.5 million in Devas' favor, right? Because they said that you can't cancel the deal arbitrarily, right? So at that time, the deal was cancelled. But later, something new happened, which is very, very strange and interesting. Devas seeked enforcement in US, Canada, France, Canada, etc. And US District Court confirms the award and Antrix challenged the jurisdiction, which actually is the decision right now. The jurisdiction was getting challenged. Earlier, the court, 9th Circuit Court said that there was no jurisdiction. And the Supreme Court said, yes, there is a jurisdiction. So jurisdiction was the key thing which is happening and the execution order of this deal, which was $5.562 million deal, right? Indian courts declared Devas fraudulent entity. Now, this is important. This happened in parallel. In 2016 or 2017, CBI filed a case against Devas saying that the company was a fraud. And why it was a fraud? We don't have to get into the details, which is captured. The details are captured in the Supreme Court judgment. So if you see here in the Supreme Court judgment, it starts from here. 12.8. This is the Supreme Court judgment, which actually ratified the NCLT order. And if you go here, and I have read through it, it talks about many, many things which, substantiate the fact that Devas was a fraud company. It didn't really have the technology. Now, friends, I don't have to go into the details of the Supreme Court judgment. It is absolutely clear that Devas didn't have this integrated technology. Even that technology does not exist today. So if they had claimed that they have this integrated technology of satellite integrated with the terrestrial network, it was a false claim. Even today, both these networks cannot work in a integrated fashion because of interference issues. You can't. If Devas had claimed, it was a completely a false claim, right? So that you have that is a very important segue to this whole discussion. So Devas really had, so if you look at Indian courts declared Devas a fraudulent entity because NCLT said that, okay, Devas because CBI filed a case, NCLT said Devas is a fraud entity and therefore the company has to be winded down, right? And then Devas went to Supreme Court against the NCLT order and Devas had and Supreme Court found that Devas actually had no working technology and it has misrepresented. Because what was the objective of Devas? To grab that 80 megahertz of spectrum in the 2.5 gigahertz band, which was valued at 12,800 crores for 20 megahertz. So imagine the kind of value. It was a multi-billion spectrum. So they misused strategic S-band, FDI raise and false claim, and CBI and ED investigated Devas for fraud and money laundering. The US Supreme Court judgment, the 5th June judgment, is what is about jurisdiction, right? But try to understand this whole issue about fraud, Devas committing a fraud, hasn't been discussed in the US courts yet. So currently it is just a jurisdiction issue. So once the decision goes back to, the whole thing goes back to the district court and district courts, the arguments are again raised, then this point about the fraud that Devas has committed, which the Supreme Court ratified in India, will get raised. So, what is the US decision does not mean. It does not mean that India has to pay the award. Because of that fraud, Supreme Court ratified the winding down of Devas company because of the fraud that it committed. It does not validate the arbitration award, does not overturn the Indian court's fraud findings, only allows US court to proceed with this case further. What happens next in the US? The district court will examine the fraud evidence, will assess whether the enforcement violate the US public policy. Indian courts ruling and ED and CBI finding to be evaluated, may hold, evidentiary hearing before the decision. So potential outcome for India, if the US court accepts the fraud finding, the case will be dismissed. India will not owe any money to Devas for compensation. If US courts reject the fraud argument, enforcement may proceed. Devas could attempt to seize Antrix asset in US or Indian government asset in US in other parts of the country, other parts of the world, like what happened in France, right, in Paris. So conclusion, India actually had a strong position. Supreme Court ruling is a procedural ruling, not substantiate, which is the US Supreme Court. India has a solid fraud defense upheld. As I told you, the technology actually didn't exist. This was the satellite transponder was a means to grab the terrestrial spectrum, because that spectrum could have been used for terrestrial as well as satellite, right? So if you are going to use that spectrum for terrestrial, the spectrum would have been valued tremendously, right? So the outcome depends on the US court accepting Indian fraud findings, and India can still defeat the claim under the US law. So that's all, friends, in this video. I hope that you understood what this case is all about and what kind of possibilities that it will lead to, and what was the foundational issue which Devas was trying to accomplish, right? Which was very nuanced. These things really don't come out in the public domain, in the discourse, because these are technical issues to be explained in very simple terms. So thanks for listening till the end, and I'll come back with a new video on a new topic next time. Thank you very much.